An all-new episode.
No politics.
No one is talking about this.
More than 80,000 Americans missing from a previous conflict going back to World War II.
80,000 missing Americans?
These great species are never going to come back again.
Extinction is forever.
The trajectory that the United States is on right now as it relates to violence is not a good one.
87.9% of men on OnlyFans are married.
No politics.
No politics, let's do it. You know, really, I mean, you're shooting at the president of the United States.
Hearing somebody yelling outside, the president's been shot, the president's been shot.
You know, Mexico is considered like, you know, a first world country, like the United States is. Their last election cycle, there were 31 successfully completed assassinations, right where Kennedy basically loses half his face to this shot. Could you predict another successful assassination?
The mayor of Chicago was sitting next to him, and he was shot and died a couple of weeks later.
And that assassination actually took place about 100 feet from my studio where I'm sitting right now, Bayfront Park. For a guy to literally walk right into the White House and have that type of access is so asinine. No, I think just as Americans, we really just don't know how close we've come to, I mean, the domestic civil conflict that would have taken place if either of these two assassinations were completed. Dr. Ronald Feinman, author of the book Assassinations, Threats, and the American Presidency, From Andrew Jackson to Barack Obama, joins the podcast today, and we're pretty much just going to jump right to Lincoln, I think, all right? Abraham Lincoln, start us off. Doctor, why did somebody want him dead in the first place?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. Lincoln, of course, was the most controversial president in our history because he was the president during the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. And the South, of course, had broken away in 1860-61, and they did not want to be part of the United States. And Lincoln was convinced that he could not allow the breakaway a part of the country. And therefore, although we did not have a declared war, we had civil war for 4 years. And there was a lot of people who hated him and wanted him dead as a result.
And what were some of the events, I guess, obviously the Civil War being the most critical, biggest one, but why was it until basically after the Civil War to where somebody actually tried to take a shot at him and actually succeeded in it?
Well, actually, there were a lot of attempts against Lincoln. Actually, until Barack Obama, I think Lincoln had more death threats than Barack Obama, but that's it. You know, he had a lot. At the time when he was about to be inaugurated, he was coming from Springfield, Illinois, through Baltimore to D.C. to the Willard Hotel where he was before the inauguration. And Baltimore was a Confederate hotbed. It was a state that was, that almost broke away. It was prevented. But the point is, Maryland was a place with a lot of people apparently who wanted Lincoln dead. And therefore, he was whisked through Baltimore in the middle of the night by Pinkerton detectives, the Pinkerton Agency, the first Secret Service, informally, in order to make sure he would make it to D.C. and be inaugurated. So that was the first threat. And then there were many other threats. But in 1864, when he was spending some time at the old soldiers' home in D.C. And going by horseback with just one or two guards, someone took a pot shot at him. He had his top hat on, and the bullet went through his top hat. Imagine that. And they think it was John Wilkes Booth who did it, but they don't know. But, the whole thing is that was quite a scary thing. That was in August 1864. Those are two key things I talk about in my book, before the actual events of the assassination. But there were many other threats all along.
So they never found out who took that shot?
No, but the speculation is that it was Booth. But others thought it was just someone, shooting, and it was accidental and it was not planned. But
accidental. yeah. That's convenient.
Well, people use guns very loosely.
Yeah, they did.
The argument is maybe somebody was hunting squirrel or something and accidentally, shot in the direction of Lincoln. But he was safe. But he lived, I think, a life where he sort of like almost expected that he might die, but he was committed to his country. He really was. I'm
sure if the Warren Commission existed back then, that's exactly what they would have said. So he's sitting in Ford's Theater. What walk us through the events of that night then?
Okay, well, he went to see Our American Cousin, a play with his wife and with a young couple that came with him. Now, originally, it was supposed to be General Grant, who was the victor in the Civil War, who was invited, but he chose not to go that day. He went off with his wife to visit relatives, so he would have otherwise been in the presidential box instead of the other couple that was with the Lincolns. And have to understand, John Wilkes Booth was a well-known actor. His brother Edwin Booth was a Union supporter, but he was a Confederate supporter. Everybody knew it. It wasn't like he kept it, secret. But he and his brother did not get along. In any case, he had acted at Ford's Theater many times, John Wilkes Booth, and Lincoln had seen him act, and also one of his sons had seen him act, and in fact had said hello to him like a year earlier. It was really weird. But on that evening, there was no protection outside. There was a so-called guard, somebody, not Secret Service, but he left to go get a drink. And I don't mean soda, I mean liquor. Yeah. And he got drunk and he didn't show up later. So basically, anybody could just walk into the theater through any entrance or exit. And in the middle of the play, Lincoln is shot by Booth, who then leaps to the stage and breaks his leg and escapes, and is finally cornered and killed 11 days later.
Tell me a little bit about the security, though. Was that typical for a president back then, just to be sitting at a theater with virtually, no security, to say the least?
There's no such thing as a Secret Service until after McKinley is assassinated in 1901. Now, there is a Secret Service in quotes, but it's only there to deal with counterfeit money, of all things.
Wow. Which is what they still do today, right?
He signed the name the Secret Service to act to create, to deal with counterfeit money on the day of his being shot. That morning, he signed that to Lincoln. Imagine that. But it was not designed to protect him. And even after Garfield was assassinated in 1881, it still didn't happen until after 1901. You had to have 3 presidents murdered in 36 years to finally have the Secret Service take on the job of protecting the president.
Well, and also it's a little concerning, too, to think that the other attempts you just told me about, too, on Lincoln's life, and here he is still unprotected, after this post-Civil War, which is just, things are about to get, even worse institutional-wise throughout the country, I feel like, with a higher political climate, too. So it's a little odd that this wasn't, an initiative at all to protect people. I mean, even Ulysses S. Grant, do you think that if he was there, the assassination attempt would have been successful if he was in the same booth?
Yes, I think it's very possible that Grant could have been killed as well. And of course, later he became president of the United States. No, it's shocking, the whole series of events, and that a well-known person, because he was known around the country. He was not an obscure person like the other assassins. And I don't think he was mentally ill, as a lot of these assassins or attempted assassins were. He was just a political activist for the South, and hated Lincoln and hated the idea of worrying about slavery, because he thought slavery was just fine. Booth thought he had no problem with that, and he didn't like that slavery was coming to an end.
And so this is basically like Wilkes Booth being such a well-known actor, and Abraham Lincoln even watching him prior at some point perform. This would be like the equivalent of like Tom Cruise assassinating Trump right now or something like that, right?
That's a funny thought.
yeah. I mean, if you think about it, right?
Well, I don't think it would be Tom Cruise. I think it'd be Robert De Niro.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it'd be De Niro for sure.
Because he has certainly choice language for our president.
Yeah, but De Niro wouldn't be able to survive that fall, though, to jump down to the stage at this point, I'm sure. He'd be an easy
now,
catch.
But if it was years ago when he was younger, maybe. But not
Yeah, no, seriously.
I don't think Tom Cruise would ever think of that kind of a thing, honestly.
No. I mean, he's probably one of the only actors that I could see, though, other than maybe like Jason Statham, being able to get away with it for 11 days and be on the run and whatnot. But do you your thoughts on this? Do you think that if the assassination of Lincoln had occurred about a year and a half to maybe 3 years prior of Lincoln, do you think it would have been more well received by the South than it did? Because from my understanding, after the assassination, Booth wasn't really well received by the South for how he thought he was going to perceive. He thought, I guess, he was going to have a hero's welcome, and I guess that really wasn't it. And do you think that if this had happened maybe 2 years prior, it would have been perceived differently?
I think it really matters because the thing is, when Booth killed Lincoln, the Civil War was over. It was already over. Earlier, it was in the heat of time with the Battle of Antietam in Maryland in 1862, the worst loss of any battle, or the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. So I don't think it mattered. I think there were a lot of people in the South and some in the North who really hated Lincoln. It's not as if everybody in the North wanted the war. A lot of people, even in New York City, did not like the idea of having a civil war. They said, let the South go. Who cares? And we had riots in New York City, draft riots, when Lincoln set up a military draft. So there was a lot of hatred around the whole country. And I don't think the timing of when he was killed really mattered. It was the fact that the war was being waged. A lot of people said, let them go, or we don't care, that kind of a thing.
Okay. And you describe Wilkes Booth's motive in one word, if you could describe it.
Well, Booth's motive was that he thought that Lincoln was a threat to the South and a threat to promote racial equality. And he decided that it was his mission in a group with others. He had others involved in the conspiracy. It wasn't just him. He actually killed Lincoln, but there were others that were supposed to kill the Vice President, Andrew Johnson, and the Secretary of State, William Henry Seward. And Seward was actually attacked in his home. He had just had surgery, and he was attacked by one of the other conspirators. But he survived and stayed on as Secretary of State under Andrew Johnson and purchased Alaska for us. That became known as Seward's Folly, because everybody said, what do you need Alaska for? What's the value? He said, the Russians are giving it up. He's sure there is something valuable under the tundra. And of course, he was right way ahead of time. Oil, gold, and silver, and things like that, Did
you say Alaska or did you say Greenland there?
Well, now there's the issue of Greenland, which,
I know. It's kind of perceived as the same way as back then. I'm sure it was probably just as wild, Alaska, but given that Alaska wasn't as, I'd say, set up as Greenland is right now, and how linked it is across the world. To other countries there too, but it is funny how they say history repeats itself, So Lincoln was the first successful, or I didn't want to say successful in like a good way, like, oh, it's successful, but like it was one that was carried out to its end, where the first assassination that was completed with resulting in a dead president. What was, you would say, like the very first assassination attempt on a president?
In 1835, under Andrew Jackson, he was assaulted at the U.S. Capitol. He was at a funeral of a congressman, and Richard Lawrence came along, and he had two pistols on him. And this is in January, height of winter, cold weather, 1835. And he tried to kill. It's really crazy. He fired both pistols, but they misfired for some reason. Thank goodness. And instead, what happened is Jackson had his cane, because he always had a cane, because he was not in the best of health and he needed to walk with a cane. He used the cane to attack Richard Lawrence himself, and others helped him, but he actually helped to indeed subdue his own assassin. Or attempted assassin. It's quite a scene. When I tell students about it, they think it's funny. The idea that here he is whacking him over the head with a cane, Richard Lawrence. He is doing that. But also, there's something else. There was a threat by letter, not actually confronting, of a person who was a well-known actor in 1835 who did not like Jackson and wrote a letter, a handwritten letter that we have into the Tennessee Historical Society, in which he threatens Jackson's life. And then later, he writes another letter apologizing for having threatened him. He's never arrested. But the point is, who is this guy? You will not believe it. He's the father of John Wilkes Booth.
Oh, wow.
Junius Brutus Booth, a well-known actor. And he wasn't born yet, John Wilkes Booth. That's 1838 he's born. So this is 1835. But isn't that wild? About that idea that his own father was threatening Jackson. I don't know if he ever knew about it, but his own father was threatening Jackson. It took more than 150 years to figure out, is this real? Is this his handwriting? And they have now proved that Junius Brutus Booth, as far as his writing, nothing else, threatened Jackson's life in a separate incident.
Yeah, family of assassins almost. That's weird. And his middle name was Brutus?
Junius Brutus Booth. Yeah.
That's also ironic. E2 Brute, like.
And then the Booth family. There's also a story about Edwin Booth. Edwin Booth was the oldest son of Junius Brutus Booth. The older brother of John Wilkes Booth was a Union supporter. And in 1863, he was on a train, and who was getting on the train and slipped and fell off the train momentarily? Robert Todd Lincoln, Lincoln's son, and he was right there by. He grabbed him and brought him up to the train and saved his life. Robert Todd Lincoln. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
And 2 years later, or less than 2 years later, his brother kills Lincoln's
his
father. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. It shows you just how small the world is. Wow. Yeah. So with Lincoln's assassination, what was the country's emotional response? How did we really react, I'd say, as citizens? Like, was there a difference between North and South reaction, or was everyone generally having the same sense?
There was a much greater mourning in the North, and there was a long period of days that his coffin went from Washington, D.C. back to Springfield. So not as much in the South, because there was great anger because they had just lost the war, and they were not happy campers about it, of course. But there was a lot of mourning across the North, yes. But he was a very divisive figure because he insisted on waging war and not letting the South break away.
Yeah, I can imagine how there's no frustration you can kind of express as a citizen at that time yourself. Like you can't log in onto Twitter, in 1865 and be like, Lincoln's dead, but guess what? We still lost the war and we're still frustrated, and so there's really no place you can kind of go with that like you can today to express yourself. Or if you were feeling sorrowful, you can't post pictures of Lincoln. How was his? Can you tell me a little bit about his funeral? Like, did it take place in D.C.?
He lay in state in the nation's capital, the U.S. Capitol. But then he had more than 2 weeks till he got back to Springfield and was buried there. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting stuff, man. It's always, because the death of a president just doesn't happen that often, and especially in office too. You're talking tumultuous times after that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that his wife, I think, always had mental issues. They didn't get along that well. And she later was put into an institution by her son, Robert Todd Lincoln, for a period of time because she was, I guess, self-destructive or in some way mentally unstable. But eventually she was released, but they were never close again because he had put her into a mental institution, Robert Todd Lincoln.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jeez. I didn't know that. I could imagine what the mental institutions were like back in 1865, too. Jeez.
Also, they had 4 sons, and all the sons died. One died very early, and 2 died in the time one died during the Civil War, and one died in 1870. Only one son, Robert Todd Lincoln, lived beyond 18, and 2 of them were very young. So, that was also a big loss for her. When you have 4 sons or 4 children, and 3 of them don't make it past, being a child.
And your husband gets murdered, right next to you too. So
yes.
Mentally unstable. I would probably be a little different myself, I guess to say. Coming from the son's point of view on that.
Well, Jackie Kennedy also experienced that, being next to her husband when he was killed.
Yeah. Jeez, man, losing 3 kids that early, and then also losing your husband. Oh my gosh. And the Kennedy, the Kennedy family too. It's almost like which one's worse, which situation is worse. But moving on to Garfield now. Was the motive kind of similar in Garfield's assassination? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Garfield. First of all, Garfield is the president. Only served 6 months, and he was shot and mortally wounded after 4 months. So he just suffered for 79 days. Because of medical malpractice or lack of knowledge. It would have been better if he had died right away. But the point is, we look back on him and we think of him as a potentially outstanding president who was shot down too soon and in a horrible way, and that he might have been a real star if he had lived. But he ended up having the second shortest term presidency of any president of history. But Garfield was killed because of the issue of patronage. about people wanting federal jobs, and there was no civil service system as we have now. And people felt that they should get jobs because of political preference, because they campaigned for a candidate, or they knew someone who was connected to the candidate. So the thing is, Charles Guteau is a mentally disturbed person who leads a dissolute life, basically, before he goes after Garfield. But the point is that what he does do, and in a way he does, is he makes one speech in front of a crowd endorsing Garfield in 1880. Big deal. You make a speech. But because of that, he wanted a federal job. All right. So you say, all right, maybe he wanted a federal job, maybe work in an office, possibly, or maybe get a postal job. No, that's not what he wanted, because he's mentally deranged. He wanted to be ambassador to Austria-Hungary. How's that? Ambassador to Austria-Hungary, or maybe a cabinet position. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Who the hell is he to think that?
Yeah.
So what happens is, starting when Garfield's inaugurated, he's going to the White House and he meets with Garfield several times. Garfield's cordial to him. He doesn't really know him, but he thinks of him as maybe a little loony. So he gives him some information about himself, and it's pretty likely that what Garfield did is put it into the circular file, meaning the garbage, and that kind of thing. But he kept on persisting, and he also went to the State Department and the Secretary of State, James G. Blaine, looking for a job. And Blaine got annoyed with him and one time said, "Get out of here." He wasn't pleasant like Garfield was. So he was being ignored a number of times. And he came up with the idea that he needed to kill Garfield because Garfield is not appreciative of what he had done by giving that speech endorsing him. And what's his thought? That if he kills Garfield, Vice President Chester Alan Arthur, who will become president, of course, if that happens, and will become president, will be so appreciative, the word appreciative we've heard a lot lately, haven't you, that he will give him what he wants. Now, how silly and crazy is that? That he thinks Arthur's going to say, this guy just killed Garfield, I'm going to vote him to a nice political job. It's so crazy. So the other point to be made here is that you say he gets into the White House just like that a number of times, and also the State Department. Again, there's no Secret Service, there's no protection. Now, of course, I've had students say to me, weren't there police at the White House, outside? And the answer is, yeah, there were regularly 2 police officers on the White House grounds, but they were not there to check when you were going into the White House. They didn't ask who you were. So you say, what are they doing there? Are you ready? To keep you off the grass. No joke. This is 1881. Isn't that insane?
Yeah, and you're talking, that's only 16 years after Lincoln.
Yeah.
Not long.
And one of the problems is that newspapers tell too much. Just like with Kennedy, they announced where he was going to be in Dallas, Fort Worth, on exactly the route and all that, which was not a good idea. And they also did with Garfield. He was going away for a vacation to the New Jersey seashore. He was going to the Union Station, railroad station in D.C., and it was announced in the papers he's going to be there at this time. And that's where he was shot by Garfield.
Oh, wow.
And get this, who was there at the time that he was shot? Robert Todd Lincoln.
Oh, really?
He was a cabinet member.
Oh, wow.
Under Garfield and then Arthur. So he was there. He was also there in 1901 in Buffalo when McKinley was shot. Robert Todd Lincoln was in the area. How's that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't want to invite him to my Thanksgiving. Jeez, that's for sure, man. Jeez. That's odd.
Interesting trivia.
Yeah, died so quick too.
About Lincoln, Robert Todd Lincoln and the Booths. Yeah.
Yeah. And how was the death perceived by the country?
How was the what? I'm sorry.
How was the death perceived by the country? Was there outrage? Was there sadness?
Shock. There was great shock, and the result of it was the push for a civil service bill to make it certain that people had to be qualified to get government jobs was pursued, and we got the Pendleton Act. The Pendleton Act of 1883, signed by President Arthur. And that Pendleton Act is still in effect all these years. Most government jobs are civil service, except the top few thousand where they're political appointments. But of course, right now, the argument is that we're having an attack on the Pendleton Act with these firing of civil servants en masse lately in this past few weeks. So it's very disturbing because it's been in effect for 40 years now.
Oh, because they weren't considered political appointments, and by the firings, then they're kind of making them, turning them back into perceived political appointments.
Yes.
That is interesting. That is interesting, and I didn't. I could see how important it would be then for your candidate to be elected president if basically every single job was basically appointed by the president's administration back then too. And also interesting, the White House then, was it considered basically just like a federal office building where you could just come and go?
In 1881, yes.
Almost like a post office.
So it was lucky nothing else happened to anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, you just walk in and you see the president working at his desk.
I mean, imagine being walked in on somebody comes to, hello, Mr. President, and you didn't expect them. Was in an appointment.
Yeah.
Nobody's stopping him. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. But I could see how easy it is for me to be like, that's wild today to think it. But back then too, you couldn't really. There wasn't as many travel options to get places and as quickly as you could get places. So there's probably more of a safer sentiment that you would have while you're at home or, that you don't have today because there's just so many more dangers too today than you ever had. But
anyway, I wanted to say that with Cousteau, he went on trial and he put on quite a performance in the courtroom. He started to sing in falsetto voice. Imagine that. And he danced around the courtroom, and he came across as really nutty and all that. But the point is, he put on a show, and it was like unbelievable. But he ended up being convicted and executed the following year.
A little Charles Manson-esque then in that courtroom, wasn't he?
Well, it's another Charles.
yeah, true. Yeah. Was he hung?
He was I think he was not hanged. He was he had
firing squad. Oh, gas chamber.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Interesting on that take. What was Booth? Booth was hung, right?
No, Booth was shot and killed in a barn.
Oh, it was the other conspirators that were hung with him.
Including Mary Surratt, the first woman ever to be hanged. And the word is hanged, by the way.
Oh, hanged. Yeah. Not hung. Yeah. No, I'm not hung. Yeah.
People always make that mistake. That's an example where it's hanged. If somebody's being killed, it's hanged.
And then, so that is basically, you got 16-year difference then, which is not a very long time.
No.
And then you're basically then up to Lincoln was the 16th president, Garfield being the 20th. So you're talking only, a couple president difference.
And then the 25th president is McKinley.
Yeah, and that's in 1901. That's only in about 20 years later. What was the motive there?
Well, 1901, McKinley was in his second term. He had Theodore Roosevelt as his vice president because his first term vice president, Garrett Hobart, imagine nobody remembers that name, Garrett Hobart of New Jersey, died in office of heart trouble in 1899. If he had not died, he almost certainly would have been on the ticket in 1900, and we would have had President Hobart after McKinley instead of Theodore Roosevelt. We never would have known who Theodore Roosevelt was. But it was Garrett Hobart. I know it sounds like a crazy name, but it's a real person. But he died in office. He was one of 7 vice presidents to die in office, by the way. We've had 7 vice presidents, as an interesting statistic. Between 1812 and 1912, 7 vice presidents died in office. 7. Since 1912, nobody has died in office. But it's really strange. We had 7 in exactly 100 years. And he's one of the last ones. Not the last, but one of the last ones. But anyway, the thing is that he picks Theodore Roosevelt as his running mate, McKinley, and his own national chairman, Republican national chairman, Mark Hanna, says, you shouldn't be picking him. He's a damn cowboy. He's a wacko. He's dangerous. And then he ends up in the White House, Theodore Roosevelt, and transforms the presidency completely because he's a strong leader. Who knows if Garrett Hobart would have been that way? But anyway, McKinley is at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, which is like a World's Fair for the Western Hemisphere, for Latin America, Canada, and the U.S. And it's September 6, 1901. And the thing is, what's going on is we have a very widespread, and people don't realize it, anarchistic movement in the world. We have a lot of anarchists who say all governments are evil and their goal is to kill leaders. And Leon Czolgosz, Czolgosz, who is Polish heritage, is an anarchist, and he believes that he has a mission. It's, of course, a little nutty. He has this mission, and he has crazy ideas. He thinks it's not so much who's in the office, it's the position. He thinks he has a mission to kill three people: the President of the United States, who happens to be William McKinley, the King of England, Edward VII, and the Pope. And his thought was he'll escape after killing McKinley. He'll travel by ship to England and kill the king, and then somehow escape and go to Italy and kill the Pope. Now, how crazy can you be to think you're going to get to do all that? But that's how crazy he is, because he's an anarchist, like a terrorist, we would call it later. So there is concern. The press secretary of McKinley is worried about this and thinks maybe he shouldn't be speaking at the Pan American Exposition, McKinley, but he says he's going to do it anyway. And in September 6th, he is shot by Czolgosz, and he lives 8 days. They think he's going to get better, but again, they don't have X-rays. They didn't have X-rays then, and they didn't have X-rays in 1881, of course. And he dies on the 14th of September. Surprisingly, people didn't think he would, so he lasts 8 days. And suddenly Theodore Roosevelt, who's not in D.C., not in Buffalo, he's hunting in the Adirondack Mountains, because nobody thinks it's important that he be nearby where the president is recovering. So they have to search for him to say, you've just become president.
Because he's in the yeah.
It's a crazy story. So the point is that he becomes president on September 14th, 1901. And in the case of Czolgosz, he is committed to a mental institution and is there for the rest of his life.
Jeez, and
as far as TR, I mentioned to students, I said, imagine September 14th, 1901, he becomes president. The whole history of the presidency transforms. First year of the new century. Then I say, add 100 years and take away 3 days. And what do we have? September 11th, 2001. New century and millennium also. And the presidency is transformed. Isn't that odd? September 14th, 01, and then September 11th, 01, 100 years later. What an interesting coincidence.
Interesting take. The symbolism on that. I know it's that is interesting, because and the odds of that too, Theodore Roosevelt becoming president, the odds of him just a few years before that becoming president were so low, and then he closes his life on Mount Rushmore. So what was after McKinley's assassination? Then what was the feel in the country at this point? You got 2 presidents that were killed, three presidents that were killed in office.
Years.
In 36 years.
All Republicans, by the way, I just want to point out, they have to all be Republicans.
Oh, yeah. You got to be looking over your shoulder, man. Head on a swivel there. That's one lifetime. 36 years is one lifetime. Imagine being alive and being able to say, I lived through 3 presidents being killed in office in my own lifetime.
Well, Robert Todd Lincoln was right nearby in all 3. Even not directly, but nearby. But the other 2, he was very close. Nearby.
What was the sentiment like in the country at this point? Any changes that people kind of either demanded or Congress's proceedings to kind of try to change this?
The one thing that happened is the Secret Service, which was only dealing with counterfeit money, now started to protect the president. And it was good they did, because as I write in my book, in 1903 at Oyster Bay, Sagamore Hill, where TR is home on Long Island in New York, we had a potential assassin who was trying to reach him, wanted to kill him because he was upset, that TR had a daughter that he wanted to date, Alice Roosevelt, gorgeous 18-year-old later Alice Roosevelt Longworth. And he seemed to think that TR would not allow him to marry his daughter. He's nutty, obviously. And he has firearms on him, but the Secret Service at Oyster Bay twice because he said, I want to see the president. He says, do you have an appointment? No. So they tell him to leave. And then when he comes back the 3rd time, finally, the Secret Service decides to check him out, and they discover firearms on him. So in theory, he might have tried to kill TR in Oyster Bay. And if that had happened, like I have a chapter on might have been, the Secretary of State, John Hay, would have become president. Also,
And what
if
was
McKinley had died in the first term, when Garrett Hobart had died already, John Hay was still Secretary of State. He would have been next. And who's John Hay? He's one of the people who works in the White House under Lincoln. Lincoln and Hay.
Wow.
I'm sorry, Nicolay and Hay, two aides, young aides in 1860s for Lincoln, and then Hay writes a multi-volume biography of Lincoln, and then he ends up being Secretary of State under McKinley and TR.
You need a Venn diagram for all this.
All these connections, yes.
Yeah. I can see how, like, sometimes conspiracy theories can just really get out there when it's just, you have all these connections. They just happen to be there, happen to be around, you know? What was the penalty for the assassination there?
Well, there was no other assassination until 1963, but...
Well, with McKinley's assassination.
In McKinley's assassination, I think I said incorrectly. I was thinking of someone else. Actually, he was hanged. I was thinking of TR's being shot at when he was a former president running in 1912. The person was put into a mental institution. So I made a mistake there when I said it earlier, so I want to correct it. But TR did have a real death threat in 1912. He was shot while running as the Progressive Boo Moose Party candidate in 1912, coming back from retirement to run as a third-party candidate, doing the best third-party performance in history, ending up second with 88 electoral votes, 6 states, and 27% of the vote. But what happened is that we had Theodore Roosevelt shot by John Fleming Schrank, who ends up going to mental institution for the rest of his life, and he's wounded. But what happens is, he's dressed, he's in Milwaukee, he's about to give a speech in the campaign, and he has his glass case in his pocket here, and he has a thick speech there, and the bullet grazes him and starts to bleed, but that glass case and the speech prevent it from being more serious. He's bleeding a little bit, but he insists on going to give his speech while he's bleeding, and he speaks for 80 minutes while he's bleeding, not much, but a little bit, and then he goes to the hospital, but he does not have the bullet removed, which is crazy, but it makes him look like a little like, almost I see the comparison like Trump when he was shot in the ear, the way he put up his fist. That's what TR did 100 years earlier. I don't know whether he thought of that in that second. I don't know if he was aware of it, but some people have compared that already.
Oh yeah. I can see why. I can see why too. Because I think Trump at that point was like, I'm gonna slowly leave here, but it would have been cool to see if he actually did, continued his speech. But when you're talking gunfire ringing out over a crowd like that,
but TR went
interesting stuff. Man.
And he said, he said, I'm not afraid, and he said, he didn't seem to care about his own health. He was a little strange, TR. He went too far.
I love it. So American, though. So American, to kind of look at it in the face and go, you tried this. I'm going to still be me, though. You can't change me being me, which is sometimes just chaotic. But
TR also used to say, I'm as fit as a bull moose. What does that mean, to be fit as a bull moose? I don't know. The bull moose is fit?
Boone moose as a boone moose?
Bull moose, the animal.
Oh yeah. Let me look
and
that up.
That's what he called the Progressive Party, because they had to have the symbol, because the Republican symbol was the elephant, and the Democratic symbol was the donkey or ass, which was portrayed by Thomas Nast, the cartoonist. And they're still that way. You see cartoons now, you'll see an ass or a donkey is a Democrat, and the elephant's a Republican.
Yeah.
The bull moose, but he said, I'm as fit as a bull moose. What does that mean? I'm as fit as Look what it means.
Well, I'm reading here, he also said famously after the shooting, it takes more than that to kill a bull moose after being shot during the 19th.
But he already made that the symbol of the party earlier, but he was dramatic. He was again, someone who always needed to be paid attention to the last minute of his life. He's a little like Trump in that regard. They have a lot of publicity. They love to be noticed, no matter whether it's good or bad.
Yeah. Oh, he's, do you ever see the, I'm not sure if this is a real pic of him riding on a bull moose. You ever see a pic of him, like actually sitting on one as he's riding through it?
I don't think I've actually seen that. I don't think so.
Because I'm looking at it now, and it's very interesting because there's one that kind of you can say is possibly like AI driven or fake because he's like sitting on a bull moose in the in the water. But then there's another one that looks more black and white real, where he's just kind of sitting on it in the woods. And not drawing comparisons, obviously, to any degree of like leadership style and morality here, but the first thing that I think of when I see the picture of him on that moose, just the way he's sitting, and maybe he got this from Theodore, was, you ever see that photo of Putin sitting on like the horse with his shirt off?
Yes. Ooh,
yeah. From looking at this photo of Theodore, it looks just like Roosevelt got that photo idea from. Now Theodore does have his shirt on in this photo, but just the hat, the way he's sitting on it. I mean, there's no way Putin didn't get that idea from Theodore Roosevelt from this, because it does look like a powerful picture. He's sitting on a bull moose, very manly and whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't know why Putin took his shirt off there,
well,
but
Trump would not do that at this age.
No. Who famously said it? I forget the American politician who had said it. It might have been. It wasn't Kennedy. It might have been Reagan who had said. Oh no.
Well, Reagan
actually, I
used to
think
ride
it was
a horse on his ranch.
I think it was Hitler who actually said it. Who said never get your photo taken of yourself in a bathing suit. It's what as a politician, he said. Yeah. I think it was Hitler who said that.
But Reagan actually rode a horse on his ranch when he was president.
Yeah.
That he did, yeah. Well, he was very dynamic and charismatic too, Reagan,
Oh, yeah. And very, I would say, like, still, like, within like the presidential expectations to Reagan. I don't think there was once where he really went like kind of, where people are like, oh, like that's a little, out of what you would expect the character of a president to kind of go out there, like maybe Theodore, maybe, some of the things that Trump has done and said, but going to the last, successfully carried out assassination here to Kennedy in 62, 35th
63.
president, there's
63.
Oh, 63, yeah. 63, November 22nd, yeah. So obviously there's a big gap there. You got about 30, oh no, not 30, about 60 years
against FDR as president-elect in Miami. 17 days before he took the oath, he was shot at in Miami, Florida. And instead of him being, luckily, not harmed, the mayor of Chicago was sitting next to him, and he was shot and died a couple of weeks later. And the assassin, a man named Giuseppe Zangara, ended up being executed by the state of Florida. And the quickest ever, from the time of the event of the shooting to his death, was 5 weeks. That was Florida justice in 1933. But if FDR had been killed, as I read in my chapter on might have been, John Nance Garner, the former Speaker of the House from Texas, a conservative who didn't agree with FDR on anything, would have been president. There would have been no New Deal.
And that assassination actually took place about 100 feet from my studio where I'm sitting right now,
really?
Bayside, yeah, in Bayfront Park. Bayfront Park, yeah, I am. I step out of the front of where my studio is located, and you are right in Bayfront Park.
I think there's a market there. I haven't been there. I think there's a market in Bayfront Park about it.
Oh, really?
I think there is, but I haven't seen.
Oh, there's probably, it's probably one of those on the on one of those benches or so. They've been redoing that park now. They just actually installed like a big fountain. Actually, the last about last month they finished up this big fountain that was going. Maybe that's what it's based off of.
But there is a memento of some type about that event on February 15th, 1933. How it could have changed the course of history if FDR had been killed.
Memento. I'm gonna look. Let me see. That's interesting. I'm gonna go out there today after we get off here and see.
I've been to Miami, but not directly there, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because there's got to be some marker because it's obviously extremely relevant. February 15th, Bayfront Park, 1933, in Miami, there, president-elect.
Imagine 17 days before the inauguration. Just amazing,
Yeah, and interesting just how things could change. Like if he doesn't miss him and instead of hitting the mayor of Chicago hits him. Same thing with Trump being president-elect. If it hits him rather than missing how insanely things are changed there. Kennedy was one where multiple shots were fired, and was a successful assassination attempt there. What can you walk us through, basically, start to finish, and also the motive of really of the assassin?
Well, of course, Lee Harvey
Mr.
Oswald
Oswald there
is the one that was believed, and I believe he was that did it alone, but it's still debated 60 years after the Warren Commission report. I tend to believe the truth, but there's all kinds
Oh,
of
and it's going to be debated today, too. I said it's going to be debated today, too.
Yes. Well, all I'll say is that he was first threatened when he was president-elect. In Massachusetts, he was on vacation when president-elect, and this guy, Richard Pavlik, came with all kinds of explosives and things in his car, and the Secret Service didn't check him out for a couple of days. But apparently he was setting up to kill President-elect Kennedy. But the story goes that he saw him with his wife and with his daughter Caroline, and decided he didn't want to kill him with them around. And then they discovered he had explosives in his car. So that was the scary thing that we learned about.
Wow.
That he could have been killed as president-elect. And then Lyndon Johnson would have become president immediately, upon inauguration. But in the case of Oswald, he, of course, was a person in the military who went to Russia and lived there for a while and married a Russian woman and had children and all that, and came back. And supposedly he was upset at Kennedy on the issue of Cuba and Fidel Castro. And supposedly, the argument is, but he never confessed to anything because he was killed almost immediately, 2 days after. So that whole thing is still very controversial. But the point is that Kennedy was in a motorcade, and I remember at that day being in college at Queens College in New York, and hearing somebody yelling outside, "The president's been shot! The president's been shot!" And nobody thought it was Kennedy. This, you might say, why not? Because Queens College was an activist campus, student activism in the early 60s. I wasn't involved in it, but people were. And there were a lot of complaints about the president of Queens College, of all people, because he banned jeans and pants for women. Had to wear skirts. It sounds crazy, the whole thing now. So actually, people thought, my God, maybe somebody's out to kill the president of the college. How crazy is that?
Oh, yeah.
So only when we left the class and went to the student union, then we realized, oh, no, it's not the president of the college, it's Kennedy. Nobody seemed to put two and two together. Nobody reacted when we first heard somebody yell, "The president's been shot." They didn't say Kennedy, they said the president's been shot. It sounds unbelievable that could have been the case, but it was that. And of course, stunned by it. And the whole thing is that, it was a terrible thing for all those who witnessed the event and all that. And that there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about that too. Those who think, that it's not Lee Harvey Oswald, that there's all kinds of theories, including Lyndon Johnson may have been involved in it, supposedly. But Lyndon Johnson was in the same motorcade a few cars back. And that's another thing. That was dumb. You don't put the president and vice president in the same motorcade. That's bad. That's bad to do. They learn from that. You don't do that. And again, you don't announce the route of travel. They don't do that anymore. We don't know where the president is until he's there and gone.
Yeah, they announced it for 4 days ahead of time. On the 18th, they announced his whole route of where he was going.
Yes, they did. You're right. Too much information. So it was a shocking event, and it was just hard to believe. And it's the most disturbing moment of my life, really, except for maybe September 11th. I'd say it was.
Yeah, 9/11.
There's a lot of shocking events, but I think other than September 11th, which is so much later, anybody who was old enough to remember, how do you ever forget that? It was unbelievable. He was only 46, the youngest to die, and he was a real star. People loved looking at him and listening to him, and loved his wife and all that. And yet there were people who didn't. A lot of people hated him because he was promoting civil rights. And the South was not too thrilled about that. So, Kennedy was in a situation where he had a lot of enemies, and there were those who didn't like him because he was Catholic. There was still anti-Catholic prejudice as well.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of set the ground layer to the 60s, though. I mean, which probably made the other assassinations of that decade seem like, I don't want to say more normalized, but you're talking, his brother Robert gets killed.
And Martin Luther King.
You got Martin Luther King, and then the other civil rights. What's his face? You got Martin Luther King. You got both Kennedys, and then Malcolm.
Oh, Malcolm X. Yes.
Malcolm X also too. If Kennedy doesn't get killed, those assassinations would probably. I mean, not that they were low profile by any means, but it probably just seemed more normalized, especially by the time you get to Kennedy's brother in '68. It's probably seemed almost normal at that point.
Yeah, and the Robert Kennedy assassination is a real turning point. I think it changed the whole political mood of the nation, and I think we suffered by his loss more than we realize, because we turned to the right politically after that. And I think if he had lived, he would have been the nominee of the party and probably would have defeated Richard Nixon and George Wallace. Can't be sure, but I think so. And of course, the thing that disturbs me is his son, his namesake, I think has really sullied the name of the family with where he's led his life and what he's doing now as Secretary of Health and Human Services. And I'm really annoyed when people say Robert F. Kennedy. It's not Robert F. Kennedy, it's Junior. You got to say Junior. The guy's dead. Don't pick on Robert F. Kennedy. He was a hero. He was good overall. His son is not.
They get you fired up.
Yes. Even on TV, in fact, on TV, they've even made a mistake. One of the newscasters on one of the stations, I couldn't believe it. They were talking about Caroline Kennedy, about the fact that she was critical of her cousin, and nobody paid attention to it after. But what they did is they said Caroline Kennedy, and they messed things up. They said the daughter of John F. Kennedy Jr. And I said, what?
Yeah,
that's her brother.
Yeah.
These people who weren't around at the time, they mess up Juniors and the original one. How could possibly Caroline be the daughter of John F. Kennedy Jr., who was younger than her?
Yeah.
It's John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting with the because I don't think the files that they're gonna release on the assassination, I don't think they're gonna have anything in there that's gonna be theatrical or really change people's minds. I really don't.
I don't either.
He really does believe that there is, and that there I don't know his exact beliefs, but I do believe that he believes that the government was involved in some sort on some sort of level. No. I personally, I do want to get your thoughts, obviously, on this, because you're an expert on this. You wrote a book on this. I can't say, obviously, that the government was involved particularly on it. I do want to say that there is a lot of things that just counter each other. There's a lot of factors in the assassination that are just a little
hard to understand.
Where there's hard to understand. Is that, especially watching the Zapruder film? I was watching it this morning again. Slow by slow, which is a recorded assassination of a president, the first one that I know of.
Yes.
Slowly but surely, that has a clear view. I mean, you're not talking, it's blurry here and there, or like there's its and bits that were put out, because watching it here, they say there's 3 shots, right?
Yeah.
You got the first one that allegedly that misses, and which to me, Oswald being set up. He's in a prone support. He's in a supported position. I'm not sure if he was laying down or if he was kneeling, but he was supported, which means that your rifle is supported on something else, which is a high factor in increasing your accuracy as a shooter. And your first shot is going to be your most accurate shot, because you have the unlimited amount of time to aim, to focus, and to focus on your breathing. That shot, he misses.
Yeah.
Which, really, I mean, you're shooting at the President of the United States. I could see maybe some nerves. And if he realized I missed, now his focus does increase, because, oh, shit, I missed. Can't miss on the second shot. So maybe I could see there. But, the second shot goes through Kennedy's throat, which then goes into Governor Connolly, who's sitting in front of him, which that shot goes behind and hits Kennedy behind through the neck, which you can high level of, certainty that is coming from Oswald, right? Especially the direction of the depository, which is located behind the president. And at any point, if I'm wrong with any of this, just tell me I'm wrong
No,
and
it makes a lot
correct
of
me on
sense.
it, because I don't want to be wrong. But I, starting from step by step there, then the third shot that was fired, though, and I'm watching this video right now, right where before Kennedy basically loses half his face to this shot, looking at a diagram of the street, the school book depository, which Oswald worked at, and he was set up with his rifle. And take in mind, too, this was a bolt-action rifle. So, which means you shoot once, you have to essentially not completely lose your sight picture through the scope, but you do have to crank the bolt back and lodge another bullet in the place, which does change your sight from...
Yes.
At least a little bit. So that second and third shot, the accuracy typically is going to go down if you're doing rapid form. And this is over the course of, some seconds here. So for him to go, psh, crank it back, resight, shoot again. Now, we're not talking far distance here, but that does kind of increase the difficulty level.
I wanted to make the comparison to Trump with Thomas Matthew Crooks, that he was shot in the ear, and then a person in the crowd is shot and killed, another one is wounded. So I'm assuming his shot was the first one, and then the second and third shot, the second one killed a person in the crowd, and the third one wounded someone. So it's a similar situation, in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been where, I don't want to make the, an off-style comparison, but, I used to play basketball growing up. My first shot was always shitty. And then my second and third and fourth shot, you start to get into a rhythm. Yeah. You really do. And I've shot rifles too in the Army. So that really was your first shot is kind of like a feeler. So that could be. I don't want to completely say that but the third shot though, watching the Zapruder film, at this point Oswald is directly behind Kennedy, and Kennedy's front half of his face gets blown off, and it goes back and to the left, which means that last shot, trying to believe that shot went from Oswald's rifle is really a tough swallow for me.
Think there's another assassin. That's the whole thing. Yeah, but it's not.
And there are witnesses that they say, said that they heard shots from the grassy knoll. The grassy knoll is a little fixture that's right, that would be in that path, that angle, that trajectory to hit Kennedy in the angle that last shot did. But, to counter my own counter on that, it would take some balls to set up in the middle of the day. What's his face? Oswald was up hidden in a school book depository. Yes. You know what I'm saying? By himself. This, you would have to somehow get a rifle and sit right in front of the president in a grassy knoll outside in broad daylight, and nobody really did see point. They say they heard they say, they might have heard a shot or so from there, but that's also hard to believe that somebody shot the president from that close a distance in the middle of the day and nobody really got a clear look that, but that is kind of the only angle that I could envision that shot coming from. So that's kind of my thoughts. I'm not going to go full deep in here and say, the government was involved and blah, blah, blah. But, I got to say that there was a second shooter. If you would show me this film and, didn't have any sort of knowledge prior and said, where did that shot come from? I mean, I don't want to sound like Horatio from CSI Miami down here, but I find it hard to believe. And I want to get your thoughts, too, because you've studied this stuff.
Well, I would just say that, there are the theories about the FBI and the CIA being involved, and the mafia involved. And then it's really crazy. There are people who would say that several presidents in the future may have been involved. The theory is that Lyndon Johnson may have been conspired, although I don't see. And then Richard Nixon, that day in Dallas, he was leaving Dallas at the airport where indeed Kennedy arrived. And so some people think maybe Nixon, because he had lost the election to Kennedy, maybe he wanted to have revenge. I think it's silly, though. But also Gerald Ford, who was on the Warren Commission and always said the Warren Commission was 100% accurate. People wondered if he was covering up something by saying that to the end of his life. And then also, this is really strange. George H.W. Bush, it was said, was in Dallas, they claim, that day, and they think he could have been one of the assassins of all things. He's a young man, but that's just crazy stuff. I mentioned all this in my book, but it's all just mentioned because a lot of it's just weird ideas, you know, to think that these future presidents could have been indirectly or directly involved.
Yeah, I mean, Oswald being killed, 2 days
Jack
later.
Ruby, yeah.
Yeah, and Ruby being, mob related, and Kennedy obviously having, some ties, which at the time was probably the mob's peak. I mean, you could say they peaked really all the way through the 80s,
RFK,
you know what I'm saying? But
the Attorney General was going after the mafia at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And there was the thought that they weren't appreciative of the mob's support, so and the mob really, I mean, you're talking, they're grasped in throughout all of America's social institutions, whichever city that they were really set up in. It's hard to ignore that link, because otherwise you got to think of Ruby as this really pissed off patriot who was acted alone to then revenge the president, and him being a mob, not a mob, I don't want to say mobster, but like, I don't see him so upset that Kennedy got murdered to the point where he felt he had to go and then kill this guy, so and also too, Oswald, the what makes a great assassination conspiracy story, but what also makes a great assassination cover-up is when the link to anybody is killed. That also is the perfect model, which is why you see, some conspiracies about crooks in the Trump assassination, because, you're looking, some of the Secret Service are looking in their rifles in Crook's direction, and it's not until you hear Crook shoot, then they shoot, and there's some conspiracies on that end, but that's what really makes a perfect assassination, is when the only person in that case being Oswald, to be able to shine some light, is if they're killed. So Oswald, he's paraded through a crowd of the media, which also to me kind of is
strange.
It's very strange why that guy wasn't guarded more than he was. Now also, I hate when people look back and criticize on a Monday morning about 50 years ago. You know what I'm saying? So I don't want to do that per se, but at the same time, it is a little odd, especially the government releasing 4 days ahead of time Kennedy's route, to the public, and then Oswald just happens, to be working in the depository, which is the tallest building that overlooks Kennedy. So
have you been there, by the way,
but
Dallas?
I have not. If I ever have, you, how is it
to be there?
Yeah. I'm sure. Because the depository still operates like a fully functioning office building, from what I read.
Well, except for that, except for the actual floor, it's a museum.
Ah, okay. No, it's interesting too, because you obviously want to believe a government set up Warren Commission that was set up to study all this, but there's things where and I didn't even get into the magic bullet that went through his neck and then lodged and hit Connolly a million times too. So interesting stuff. I really don't know, even if documents were released, to say otherwise, if anybody at this point would solely believe anything. I think it's one of those legendary topics that will just always be debated until the end of time.
Well, with RFK, of course, Sirhan is still in prison all these years.
Yeah.
And that he has claimed he didn't know, he has claimed he wasn't involved in it and all that. But I mean, there are those who think that might have been another person shooting at that time also. It's all speculative, but there's no way to prove it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, from all of these, I mean, do you think that there's going to be another could you predict another successful assassination with kind of your studies and what you've looked at and kind of where we are today?
I'm hoping not, but honestly, with the political atmosphere we're in now, I think our president and our vice president and also other public officials in Congress, there's a lot of people out there and a lot of guns out there, and I feel there will be someday, maybe not if Trump or Vance, but if someone, look, as it is, Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman, was shot back in 2011.
Yeah.
We had the threat on others at other times, and it's a very divisive atmosphere. I think more so than any time since the Civil War. This is worse than the 1960s. The division.
You think?
I think it is.
I think. Well, because I was looking at those 4 assassinations between X, Martin, and both Kennedys, and I'm like thinking to myself, I was like, imagine if that happened today. Imagine like Al Sharpton got killed, Donald Trump got killed, and say like two other really high profile individuals. Yeah. I mean, what we have today, I think people are also have more of capabilities than they did back in the
better. I mean, they're much easier now than they ever were. Really terrible.
Well, they're easier. They're easier. They're more powerful. And plus too, I just there's easier ways to organize as well. And for some reason, I think people feel that they could get away with things more than they ever did, which is the actual. Yes. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. But people have that like gall behind them. They have the gall behind them, like they don't know history, like they don't know that these things have happened and how bad things have gotten. And a couple of quick, because people, I feel like today with assassinations, we immediately think of Kennedy. That's like presidential assassinations, even though. Yeah, Kennedy and Lincoln. Even though the one that just happened with Trump, all of the threats against Obama, especially with social media starting as Obama became president. Yes. That's really where those threats, instead of going from in writing to then in tweets and in Facebook, we tend to think so far back, but really. On my news show, I had came across a book, or not a book, an article about Mexico's assassination attempts, and we had the headline astounded me because in their last election cycle alone, and granted, this is Mexico, this is our neighboring country that we share a border with, just as like we do with Canada. It's not like I'm talking about Sudan or Somalia, who's been at civil war for decades and decades. Mexico is considered like a first world country, like the United States is, and their last election cycle, which lasted from November 20th of 2023 through June 2nd, 2024, there were 31 successfully completed assassinations on political figures or running for election. And that's considering elections that are, running for some type of local, state, or federal office. And all of these assassinations occurred within the 6 major political parties that exist in Mexico. So it's not like, somebody who has like no following who's just screaming about issues but like says they're running and they're not. I mean, these are officially running candidates or current office held candidates. That includes obviously the famous party of the PRI, the Labor Party, the Citizens Movement, the National Regeneration Movement, the National Action Party, and the Green Party of Mexico. And those attacks, I mean, most of them, just like the United States ones, were used by guns, but most of those are through hired professionals. It wasn't like your nut job out there who like a Crooks or, who kind of lost it. You're talking hired professionals and a few stabbings and worst off, a couple kidnappings. To where then the bodies were found afterwards. So, these we're not too far away from, depravity. Because this is something that you would think wouldn't be happening in 2024.
I wanted to mention, before we leave, or whenever we leave, I just wanted to bring up that Reagan's being shot was the last time until Trump. So that's one, quote, good thing that nobody was directly threatened between 1981 and 2024. But, of course, with Obama, there were a lot of threats, more than anybody since Lincoln. And there's the case of Omar Gonzalez, who got into the White House. The Secret Service really messed up. They weren't home, the Obamas, but he actually was in the White House walking upstairs when they found him. And it was lucky they weren't there. This was in 2014. So it's like really strange that could have even happened. The Secret Service is in crisis.
Well, and that's why people, I think, that's an invitation to people to give to people to conspiracy theories. It's an open invitation when in 2014, you imagine hearing that somebody walked into the White House and shot Obama. It's like for somebody not to be involved internally, it's almost like there's nobody that can be that incompetent. And that's honestly worse than the crooks to Trump thing, because there were so many failures we're hearing about now, but like for a guy to literally walk right into the White House and and have that type of access is so asinine today.
And there's also been cases of a person trying to fly a plane onto the White House grounds under Bill Clinton, and also people jumping over the fence. But that's not as serious as 2014. Luckily nobody was home and nothing happened, but the kids were out with both of them, but it's just shocking that these kind of things should even happen. So we have definite problems with security.
Yeah. And I think too, we have a lax problem too, where I think, you do the same routine over and over, nothing happens, you get comfortable, and, you let your guard down significantly, after your first couple of days of heightened alert. It's insane. I mean, there are a couple of there's one example here, that's good, and then one that's bad that also resonates in the success, but then of a protected official, but then the second obvious failure here. But also goes to show that I think right now we should be on very high alert as citizens when it comes to assassinations of high-profile figures, because I'm going to go through two here real quick, just in recent years, which I think we've all forgotten about, the level of incivility that could have been provided to us if these two attempts were successful. Because on June 8th, 2022, you got less than 3 years ago, Nicholas Rosk, nut job. So we're not talking here a Wilkes Booth, nut job here, traveled to Brett Kavanaugh's home, Supreme Court Justice. We all remember the Kavanaugh hearings. And from his own words, planned to break into Kavanaugh's house, shoot him, and then commit suicide himself, citing his political disdain of Kavanaugh for his reason to do so. Traveled to Maryland from Cali to do this, and when he gets out of a taxi cab at 1 a.m, literally right in front of Kavanaugh's house. But he's spooked by U.S. Marshals that are camped outside of his house. So he just kind of shovels down the street because for whatever reason he didn't expect Supreme Court Justice to be protected. So he shuffles down the street, calls his sister to tell him his plan. Sister convinces him to call 911 on himself, and he does it. The guy does it, and he's now set to face trial this upcoming June, actually, for attempted murder of a Supreme Court judge. But, he said he just planned on, going to shoot him, and then kill himself. But it's interesting because he says that, but he was caught having a zip tie, a knife, duct tape, a screwdriver, a nail punch, all while wearing padded boots to be stealthy. So, you're talking the level of depravity here of a high-profile official. And then, a few months later after that, in October of 2022, you have another nut job, David DePappy, who actually did go a little bit further than... did go further than Rose, because he actually does break in to the Pelosi residence in San Francisco and beats up the husband with the hammer and basically takes him hostage, in his house. It beats him, fractures his skull, which requires him surgery. And at this point, Nancy Pelosi is the third highest ranking official in the entire country, being 2 steps down underneath the president. And the only reason we're not reading today about a tortured and assassinated Speaker of the House is because Nancy was not home at the time, and this guy was expecting her to be. But again, the assailant has zip ties, duct tape, a rope, 2 hammers, and a rubber cloth and gloves on him. And, I think just as Americans, we really just don't know how close we've come to, the domestic civil conflict that would have taken place if either of these 2 assassinations were completed, because you're talking about torture as well, which is something you typically don't see in the previous assassinations. These, you now have a little sadistic element. So we might be entering a new phase when it comes to these political conflicts and attempted assassinations that we really didn't see, because the killings would have been awful to take place alone, but when you're talking zip ties, freaking little nail gun action, that's wild stuff, man. And I think we should really need to kind of learn more about this stuff to feel that humbleness of what could have been.
Also, we have to mention the direct threat against Vice President Mike Pence on the January 6th U.S. Capitol insurrection, where they had a news fair ready for him. They could have got him. They would have wanted to hang him, Mike Pence, when he was vice president on January 6th, 2021.
Oh, they were upset with Pence.
What's that?
They were upset with Pence.
Well, that doesn't make it right.
Oh, no. That's what I'm saying. They would have been quite disdained seeing him face to face. Finally, I'm sure. And notably, any other type, a lot of politicians there, that were possibly could have. Imagine the guy carrying the statue around that he took from the famous picture of him. So if he sees AOC cruising through the rotunda there, you know what I'm saying?
Pelosi was threatened that day, not as direct as Mike Pence, but she was. They were looking for her. These people. So we have that also, and we also had the situation where a particular, person working for the government, as police, I guess, also helped Mitt Romney change direction where he left the building in the middle of the insurrection. Mitt Romney was under threat.
Oh, I didn't know. I hadn't heard anything about Mitt Romney. I haven't heard Mitt Romney's name actually in quite a minute.
The man's name, the person who worked for the U.S. Capitol. But he thanked this one guard for directing the rioters in a different direction. They were moving toward the Senate chamber, and Romney was coming out, so he was able to get away, and of course others also got away. But Romney was a big incident, it didn't become a direct threat because of the particular person working in the U.S. Capitol, workers, but it was really scary, Yeah,
and you'd think too by now, the federal officials too would have tighten the grip on some security measures, because we really, I think we just assume that our level of government would have everything on absolute lock, but it's like time and time again these failures slip through the crack. I didn't know about that 2014 Barack Obama where a guy just strolls into. That's just just wild stuff, and I hope we're not talking about any actual assassinations again in the future, because I don't think that the country can take it. I really I don't think we'd be able to watch on the news and be able to carry on the next year in a functional way if one of these leaders, political sides, gets killed, let alone, zip ties in their own house type stuff. You know what I'm saying? What a failure. What a failure. Thank God the U.S. Marshals were there. But, and that Pelosi thing, too. Have you ever listened to that phone call, the 911 from Paul Pelosi that he had to the dispatcher?
Yes.
So Paul Pelosi calls 911 with the guy next to him. in his house and says, "Oh yeah, this there's this guy in my house, and he's trying to play it off like he's not trying to say you need to come now because
very calm.
There's a
Pelosi
booger."
was
Yeah.
very calm.
But he's trying to communicate to the dispatcher, like, no, you need to send somebody. The dispatcher wants no part of this conversation. She wants to get off. This must be her last phone call before she goes home for a long weekend, because she wants to get off the phone as quickly as she can. Okay, so you don't need help? Yeah. Okay, well, have a nice day, sir. Call us back. And Paul Pelosi stays on the line and goes, well, he mentions his last name. He mentions the Capitol Police. The woman still tries to get off the phone, and then he is begging the woman to send somebody, and she finally sends a welfare check with the cops, and then the cops show up, and then the guy like tries to attack him with the hammer and stuff. But you're talking about another social institution there set to protect people, and the guy, I'm listening to this conversation the first time. I already know the guy's under distress. And I don't have that type of training of listening to these calls, and just really awful stuff, because that could have been another slip through the crack.
He's 82 years old at the time, but he's very alert. He's not in bad shape mentally,
And I am one who will, obviously kind of always analyze different theories out there, conspiracy wise too, because sometimes there are some truth to it, like the Kennedy one, but. There were some theories out there that were awful about the Paul Pelosi thing, that people were saying that was his gay lover out there, and they had the domestic conflict while Nancy was away, and like, it's so important. Like, you don't like the guy, I get it.
That's terrible.
You don't like the family, I get it. But for people to spread those rumors that he was having a gay affair while his wife was away, meanwhile the guy had a hammer into his head, had to get surgery on his skull, and he's lucky he survived, it was just awful. So like the people running with other theories is fine, but you need to be evidence-led. It has to be evidence-led. You know what I'm saying? Just to head off on that. Appreciate your time, Dr. Feinman. I really do.
I want to mention that we have two women who tried to, in theory, with threatening Gerald Ford within 17 days of each other in 1975.
Oh, two women?
Two women, yes, in California, Sacramento and San Francisco. Lynette Squeaky Throne, a follower of Charles Manson, and Sarah Jane Moore. So I just want to mention, it's not always men, it's also women.
Interesting. Do you know why they their motives?
Their motive was that they felt that he was not, he was not, interested enough in dealing with women's issues, and that they felt that somehow would be better to have someone else, Nelson Rockefeller, I guess, who was vice president, take over. But basically they're mentally deranged people. And particularly
okay. It was more of the deranged style.
I'm sorry, what?
It was more the deranged style than it was, okay.
And I wanted to, just before we leave, show you the cover of my book.
Yes.
Show you what it looks like.
Yeah, where can people find the book? It's called Assassinations, Threats, and the American Presidency.
Barack Obama, and it's available at Amazon or from Roman Littlefield. But Amazon, you can always get anything at Amazon.
Okay. Good stuff, Dr. Feinman. I appreciate it. You guys, check out the book too. You'll hopefully not have to write a whole nother one in your lifetime. But it's Jesus. You never know.
I was asked after the first Trump threat by a few stations to comment. So even an Australian TV station had me on to talk about the threat. So, after all these years, the book came out in 2015 and then paperback in 2017. The fact is, I suddenly got calls again of people wanting to know what I thought. So the book has really been good in that sense. And I thank you for having invited me. And I've really enjoyed this.
Okay, no problem, Dr. Feinman. We will see you down the road then.